You're listening to Why We Do What We Do. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your boogieing host, Abraham.
And I'm your footloose and fancy-free host, Shane.
We're a psychology podcast. We talk about all of the things that humans do, sometimes what animals do, and sometimes when humans dance. That is the thing that we might talk about also.
Did not expect this one to come up, but here it is on our bingo card, I guess.
Sure. And just to let you know, billboarding this right at the front, that if you would like to support us, you can join us on Patreon, pick up some merch, leave us a rating and review, follow us on social media, and of course, you can go start a national dancing circuit and name it Why We Do What We Do in honor of us, and we would appreciate that. And I'll talk more about how you can support us at the end of this discussion. So this episode comes out on June 14th, and there are some things that you should know in celebrating when this episode happens that you can go about your day and acknowledge the holidays that are out there.
Yes, for the month of June, it is Pride Month.
Woot woot.
Yep, exactly, full support. And also National Soul Food Month, which I don't know that we talked about already, but delicious.
I don't think we have. It is Flag Day, which is exciting. And then one I'm personally excited about, it is World Blood Donor Day. So go out and donate that blood while wearing a flag, maybe.
I was to say, you're about due for that, aren't you?
Yeah, actually, I was thinking about, I think some one of these upcoming weeks. I just did it a couple weeks ago, but one of these upcoming weeks I am due.
Yeah. It's also International Bath Day, which is a sore point for me because I have yet to find a bath that I fit in. Funny fact, I am somewhere down the line related to President Taft, who historically had trouble with baths because he was considered the largest president. So, interesting fact, I've got presidential blood in me. And then also, it's National Strawberry Shortcake Day, which is arguably the best part of all of these.
Yeah, so donate blood while using a flag-designed towel, maybe, taking a bath, eating strawberry shortcake, celebrating Pride, and maybe make that shortcake soul food somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, we're going to kick this one off with this very lovely little quote, I guess, vignette, if you will, this short little story. Take it away, Shane.
This is a quote from the book The Black Death and the Dancing Mania from 1888, so it's a little old. It goes like this, quote, "They formed circles hand in hand and appearing to have lost all control over their senses, continued dancing, regardless of the bystanders, for hours together in wild delirium until at last they fell to the ground in a state of exhaustion. They then complained of extreme oppression and groaned as if the agonies of death until they were swathed in clothes bound tightly around their waists, upon which they again recovered and remained free from complaint until the next attack." And that comes from Justice Friedrich Karl Hecker's book, The Black Death and the Dancing Mania.
Awesome. I really love that you include these in notes when you're the one who's responsible for taking these on, is asking the question, what do Pokemon, witches, bread, and drugs all have in common?
It is always fun to kind of like tie these weird things together and how they're related. And Dancing Plagues is not where I expected Pokemon to show up.
The research takes us in wacky places, and so it's fun to sort of ask that question, the trivia night question of what those have in common.
Yeah.
And yeah, you just said it. I don't think we had mentioned yet. We are talking about the dancing plagues, of which there have been a few, and we'll go through that. What are they, and why did they happen, and when did they happen, and all those questions you might have. And like, why are you talking about this might be a question you have. And we're going to answer that all in this discussion today.
Yeah, dancing plagues are kind of this wild, very strange human phenomenon. So it is exactly as absurd as it sounds. Okay, just so everybody's aware, like when we say dancing plagues, it is a large group of humans that get together and they dance uncontrollably. But let's go ahead and like actually get a formal definition. So dancing plagues, also known as dancing mania or St. Vitus dance or choreomania, St. John's dance or Tarantism.
Sure.
It was a phenomenon that took place during the 14th and 17th centuries in Europe, mostly. Essentially, what would happen was that large groups of people, usually like within a certain village or a certain radius of an area,
sure,
a large groups of people, sometimes nearing numbers well into the thousands, would sporadically begin dancing and not stop dancing.
Just keep on going. The Energizer Bunny.
It's very much so the scene from Hocus Pocus when they all get bewitched and they're dancing and they can't stop. It's that, but worse.
Maybe that's what happened.
Yeah, the Sanderson sisters are to blame for all these events.
I think we'll find out. So you mentioned this is a mania. So for everyone listening, as a quick reminder, mania is, quote, a mental illness marked by periods of great excitement or euphoria, delusions, and overactivity, end quote. And that's important to keep that definition in mind. A lot of people, I think, sort of misuse manic and mania, and that's really what it is those periods of great excitement and sort of what looks like maybe overstimulation, sort of hyperactivity in a way.
Kind of like above what is like considered like a social norm.
Yeah.
Now, this supposedly impacted adults and children across Europe, and those impacted by the mania, this dancing mania, would continue to dance or move erratically until they either stopped as a result of injury or exhaustion. So this is an important piece of this. It wasn't that they were just dancing and then they danced for a long time. It wasn't like Coachella or Burning Man. Like what you're talking about is specifically like they're dancing until they hurt themselves or they are so exhausted they can't dance anymore. So it's very similar to like the Beetlejuice dinner party scene.
I was going to ask, yeah.
Without the possession part.
Got it. Well, as far as we know.
As far as we know. I guess that's fair.
Yeah, so the Bewitched scene from Hocus Pocus or the dinner scene from Beetlejuice, both very old movies at this point. Really dating ourselves here. I haven't watched Beetlejuice in a minute. I bet it holds up. It was really fun.
It's very scary.
Is it? Okay.
You know, it's very Tim Burton, like that kind of horror, like that you saw in like Pee-wee's Big Top or whatever it is with the truck driver and all that. Very scary.
I never saw that, but now I'm very curious. But I mean, yeah, there's a lot of sort of horrific and sort of, I don't know, macabre and twisted imagery, and that has to do with sort of the afterlife and death and that sort of thing. So yeah, there's that. Anyway, we're talking about dancing plagues. This type of psychological phenomenon has also been classified as a mass psychogenic illness, or MPI. So MPI means mass psychogenic illness. And these types of phenomenon are considered essentially social, meaning that it takes cues from the social environment. People see what others around them are doing and react accordingly in a way that maybe sometimes feels involuntary, the way of thinking about it.
Yes. And we are going to talk about mass psychogenic illnesses and what that means. Another kind of phrase, and we'll get into this more, is mass hysteria.
Right.
The technical term is mass psychogenic illness, but if you're familiar with the term mass hysteria, that's really what this is all about.
Fair enough.
So I think it's worth talking about a specific phenomenon, a specific dancing plague that occurred that kind of led me to kind of dive into some of this discussion. And that's the dancing plague of 1518. This is one of the most well-documented events to take place related to dancing phenomenons or the dancing plagues. And this occurred in a very specific area in 1518.
So as you said, it began in 1518. So we're talking more than 500 years ago.
Uh-huh.
And it was apparently started by a person, and this was a woman named Frau Trophia.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like it was made up, but that was apparently her name.
Uh-huh.
And so she just began dancing in the street. Well before Martha Reeves and the Vandellas, who did it before David Bowie and Mick Jagger, but just dancing in the street, you know?
Yeah. Also, Billy Idol's Dancing with Myself and Bruce Springsteen's Dancing in the Dark are much better songs than Dancing in the Street. So I'm just going to lay that out there for everybody.
Oh,
if you have an opinion,
shots fired.
If you have an opinion, feel free to reach out to us, email us, and let us know. But I'm going to go ahead and say those. Dancing with Myself is a pretty good song. That's it.
I like Dancing with Myself. It's good.
Yeah. Dancing in the Dark is good too. Anyway, they're all good. They're all good songs. I'm just saying, if I had to rank all three,
I see.
It's going to go Dancing with Myself, Dancing in the Dark, Dancing in the Street.
So you're not criticizing him, you're just offering a sort of list of preference.
Yeah, like a hierarchy of sorts.
Okay.
Now, this reportedly occurred for about 1 full week, with about 40 people joining the dance during this time. Now, you might be going, this is 1518, and they're documenting only 40 people being involved in this. So that's not a lot of people in the grand scope of human history. But some reports included that people died as a result of this specific event. And so that's where this kind of comes in. Is like people were, like where it started with 40 people joining, didn't seem like a lot, but it does get worse.
Well, and, thinking about that long ago, the population of the Earth was much, 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 much smaller than it is currently. So 40 people was proportionally quite a bit more. Also, I think villages, cities, and towns tended to be much smaller. So 40 people may have been a large chunk of a particular municipality, if you will. And the other thing, too, is like this is such a weird phenomenon that any amount of people doing it would probably be something that made the news.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. Yeah.
Yeah, just to randomly start dancing. So we started talking about this 1518 dancing plague started by Frau Trophia or whatever. And several weeks later, about 400 more people were swept up in the mania. And throughout the course of this specific event, it was reported that people obviously the news outlets at the time maybe weren't as reliable and consistent as what we have today.
Yeah.
Take that as you will. But it was reported that people suffered strokes or heart attacks in the mania of their dancing. And this claim is debated, as we said. As you can imagine, the records aren't that great. So take that as you will. But the reports did happen that they had these medical events while in these long bouts of dancing. It's not an unreasonable thing to suspect may have happened to at least somebody.
Yeah, and just to be clear too, this wasn't like they would dance for a couple hours and then just go to sleep. Like, it was things that it continued on. Like, people were staying up and like falling down from exhaustion from literally not sleeping during this. Authorities in general could not stop people from dancing. That was another part of this. Like, they couldn't just like interrupt people dancing, and local governments went so far as to ban music.
Wow.
Which, they banned music and the dancing still continued. So I guess I would say Kevin Bacon would probably be pretty proud.
The music was in their souls the whole time.
That's it. There wasn't a preacher in the world that could have stopped them from dancing.
I imagine that the police were afraid that if they got close to the dancing people, they'd be swept up in it and start dancing themselves. And look kind of like the 2017 Ghostbusters or 2016, whatever it was.
Oh, yeah. Where everybody was possessed and dancing. Yeah, that would have been, I forgot about that too. I guess there's so many like involuntary dance movies out there now. Weekend at Bernie's.
I never actually saw that.
The second one, he gets possessed and he dances the whole time.
Okay.
Because his body's still around for some reason.
There's probably more. You know what, people? What we need is we need you to go on social media, tag us, and then list movies that we have not mentioned that have dancing, involuntary, compulsory dancing going on.
Yes, absolutely.
Because clearly this is a genre unto itself, which is impressive.
It spans genres even.
That's right. Yeah, it does. It is a larger umbrella than we would have thought.
And I feel like we have to be clear. We're not talking about dance fighting. So we can exclude West Side Story and Guardians of the Galaxy. Like, dance fighting is not part of this. We're talking about like mass group dancing. That's not, and maybe not a musical either.
Yes, that's correct.
Because I feel like that's like bound to happen. Like, okay, Grease, everybody's dancing. That's fine.
It's got to be involuntary.
It can't be a musical. It's got to be involuntary. Do with that what you will.
Yes. Now, what is known about this specific event, we're still on 1518, by the way, is that the people did dance and nobody had any clue why it started or why it lasted as long as it did. Obviously, at 1518, some believed that it was a result of demonic possession, which would fall in line with some of the movies we've described. It was also hypothesized to be due to overheated blood. Witchcraft could have been involved. Standard fare, for the 1518 time period, is they were going to go with anything but a reasonable explanation.
There's all kinds of explanations, and the ones that I kept coming back to were those ones. But now I'm also picturing like police in 1518, because we know police forces didn't really exist, but they kind of did. So like it's like really like the Royal Guard or whatever. But like now I'm picturing like a horse with like a light on its head, like like the siren, like but like it's almost like Monty Python, where they're like the night is just going woo, like doing the air, So
that's pretty great.
I do like that image. So while you all ponder that and you think about that, we're going to take an ad break and come back and discuss why this even happened to begin with.
Okay, so we were describing this dancing plague of 1518, one of the earliest ones, and obviously we want to then talk about why this might have happened. We obviously mentioned sort of their hypotheses for the time, but some more contemporary hypotheses suggested that maybe the cause of the 1518 dancing plagues, as well as some others that came later, could have been the result of several things. One that jumped out that is maybe a more plausible explanation is food poisoning, specifically a fungus that causes ergotism from, ergot. And this type of fungus related to food poisoning comes from grainy foods that get contaminated with fungus. I think it's like if they're left moist or something like that, not properly stored. And this produces ergotamine, I think is how that's said, which has psychoactive properties similar to LSD. Actually, fun fact, this same fungus was linked to some of the Salem witch trials. Another fun fact is I think that the original LSD recipe was developed from some of the compounds found in ergot. And honestly, ergot might be a thing worth doing a whole episode on in the future, and like ergot poisoning, because it was a pretty wild time back when they did not know what was happening and will all of a sudden just be like tripping out on their fungal grains.
Yeah, this is one of those episodes I'm surprised that we didn't really get into MK Ultra, but there's a direct line from Dancing Plagues to MK Ultra and acid tests that were done in poisoned water holes and stuff like that. So that's always fun.
How many things have we linked together? I think we've gotten witches and bread and drugs so far.
So far, yeah.
Okay, we're missing one.
Oh, we're gonna get there. So you brought the Salem witch trials, which at the time too was also linked to, besides the ergotism and all that, it was linked to stress-induced mass hysteria. So these dancing plagues, just to kind of picture this, living in Europe at this time, especially 1518, very difficult. Not easy for anybody.
Right.
Really living anywhere as a human, not very easy for anybody. But besides there being very little in the way of resources, those without resources were very limited in their resources even more. So they were starving, and royalty lived extravagantly. And while those that were in their care, their people, the people that they were supposed to take care of in their kingdoms and their territories, were often relegated to long, hard work conditions, extreme weather, very little nutritious food. Which, if you've ever seen an English breakfast, then you know. But it's incredibly stressful, to say the least. Like, it was a bad time. So, it makes sense that people would maybe, kind of snap and start dancing. Like, that seems like a better option,
Another possible explanation here was religion. There were many of these explanations, though there is really no credence to the explanations here. So, yeah, that might have been another thing.
Yeah, it was super weird. Like, they brought up religion, but they didn't really explain, why. I couldn't find, why religion was a thing.
Yeah, why would that be a cause?
Unless it was, maybe part of, a mass or, some kind of sermon. But, this event in particular had nothing to do with any sermon. So there was not really a good explanation for that. But I want to kind of unpack the general phenomenon of mass psychogenic illness, because we kind of talked about that later. The dancing, we'll get to that later. But, this idea of, mass hysteria, mass psychogenic illness.
MPI.
MPI is defined as an event where people in a group start feeling sick at the same time, or have some kind of sensation, feeling, some kind of phenomenon, even though there is no physical or environmental reason for them to be sick.
Yeah.
So this idea of a lot of people are experiencing this event, this singular thing, but there's no reason why.
Yeah, Chernobyl, not an MPI. There was a good reason for them to be sick.
Yes.
It was a lot of radiation exposure.
Uh-huh. Yep. Opposite of an MPI.
Yeah. All right. Other names for this phenomenon also include mass sociogenic illness, mass psychogenic disorder, epidemic hysteria, and mass hysteria, which you've already sort of alluded to as a way to describe what's happening here.
Yeah. Now, some features of MPIs can include, but are not limited to, symptoms that have no organic basis, symptoms that are transient and benign. You would assume that dancing would be a thing that would kind of pass and be kind of relatively harmless. And there's a rapid onset and recovery. So it seems to kind of come out of nowhere, and it's really prevalent, and then it disappears all of a sudden.
Some other features might include extraordinary anxiety, symptoms spread via sight, sound, or oral communication. As we said, this does seem to be social in its nature. And then it also moves down the age scale.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting. So, it's it starts with older folks, and then, the new participants start getting younger and younger and younger.
Okay, got you. I see.
Yeah.
As a reverse of what trends are today, the trends actually starts with the older generation and then is picked up by the younger generation.
This would be the equivalent of, TikTok being started in a nursing home. And then finding its way back to a preschool much later, and then the nursing homes being you guys are behind on the times.
So 2000 and late.
Yeah, that's a totally timely phrase as well. Hey, we're almost we're 5 years away from being able to say 2020 late.
True.
Oh, that's horrible. Another thing that's kind of unique about this is that there's a high rate of female participants. And I put an asterisk next to this because I think it's important to kind of unpack this. The term hysteria, obviously problematic if you are not familiar with the history of the term hysteria and what that meant. And a lot of times what would happen is any sort of anything that was outside of a social norm or social expectation that benefited men, women in the society would end up getting blamed for, or being diagnosed, or sent off to some psychiatric ward, or told that they were demons, or whatever, right? Women have had it very difficult for many, 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 many years. And part of it is because the term hysteria is really all about, it was coined for women who were not acting according to social norms. So,
Right.
which is why we're looking at MPIs and not mass hysteria as a term. So anyway, there were a lot of female participants in these events, partly because of, social standards. Oh, you're having a period. Okay, you must be hysterical.
Sure. Some other common symptoms of these phenomenon also include headaches, nausea, cramps, coughing, fatigue, sore throat, chest tightness, vomiting, anxiety, diarrhea, rashes, itches, and loss of consciousness. Ask your doctor if Ozempia is right for you.
Yeah, there are all these other things that would come up, and it's kind of like, it was just a wild experience. But there's a general consensus that stress and anxiety play a key role in triggering these types of events. And we'll see as we go through some other events that are like this, these mass psychogenic illnesses, you're going to find kind of a common thing, which is there's some stress, there's something going on, and then it just kind of like catches like wildfire across like social behavior.
Indeed. Throughout history, we started with this 1518 one that seems, as far as I can tell, is the sort of first example, at least, that someone wrote this down and decided to talk about it. It's possible it happened before and we just have no record of it.
Sure.
They were really good at getting away with things and leaving no trace back in the day. But there have been more events than just that 1518 one. Matter of fact, there have been multiple that have been attributed to stress and anxiety, though this analysis has been retroactively conducted. And so we don't actually know. Like that's like we're trying to reflect on it and determine what could have been the cause. And it lacks information due to the sort of record keeping practices at the periods during which analysis would have taken place. But there are some more examples of this. And we've already mentioned the first one here, which is the Salem witch trials, or just witch trials in general, because Salem was kind of on the tail end of some of the witch trial stuff.
The witch trials were really bad. So there's also the Irish Fright, which I hadn't heard about. And there's also the Hammersmith ghost hysteria from 1803. And basically what this was that people began seeing a ghost and were reported to have been assaulted by it. And many people began arming themselves with guns. Specifically, Thomas Millwood was a bricklayer, and he was shot and killed during the event after being mistaken as a ghost. So, like, these can be very dangerous.
Do you think he was an ancestor of Mike Pence?
It's very possible.
That's why they thought he was a ghost.
This is so pale and so weird.
Yeah. That really sounds like, that there's a parallel between that and today's UAP sightings that's been dominating the news cycle lately. So very similar. Spring-Heeled Jack sightings, 1837 to 1904, and the Halifax Slasher are also examples of this.
There's also the War of the Worlds radio broadcast. If you're not familiar with that, they aired H.G. Wells. Is it H.G. Wells?
I think it's H.G. Wells. But apparently, I heard a skeptical sort of takedown of that. And they were like, honestly, there's only a few people that would have been listening at the time that it was aired. And like, yeah, some people did get really upset by it and thought it was real. But like how widespread it was seems like it was blown way out of proportion. Like the news about it was way bigger than the actual panic about it.
Yeah. Well, and so like that's what I thought was interesting. It was like it was listed as like one of these mass hysteria events.
Oh.
So I was like, kind of, okay, all right. There's also the Ghost Rockets of 1946, which sounds awesome.
Yeah, I love that name.
Yeah.
I want a ghost rocket, I think. Maybe I don't.
Maybe, yeah. Might be fun.
There's the, do my best with this word, Tanganyika laughter epidemic of 1962.
That sounds scary.
Yeah.
There's also the Satanic Panic of the 80s. Like everybody was like real freaked out about that. And like that's why D&D got banned from so many places.
Right. Finally, we get our last major connection here is the Pokemon Panic of 1997.
Yeah.
This was not Pokemon Go, although that might qualify.
That might qualify. So the Pokemon Panic, there was an episode of the Pokemon show where it had to do with Porygon. If you're not familiar with Porygon's the computer Pokemon and all that.
Okay.
So anyway, the whole thing was like, it's very electronic based and computer based. And so there were like these strobing lights in the show and people all over Japan started having seizures.
Oh.
They couldn't replicate it, but it started happening and like thousands and thousands of kids had this experience. And so they ended up pulling the episode. You can't find it unless you like really dig for it. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's kind of strange.
And then some of you may remember just a few short years ago, the 2016 clown sightings around the United States of people just randomly dressed as clowns walking down the street for no apparent reason. It was a thing that happened.
Yeah, it was like that was happening a lot.
It was, yeah. It was like a whole thing.
Like clowns would just walk out of the woods.
Yeah.
I feel like if I were younger, like our friends would have been those friends that would have like totally perpetuated it. Like it would have been a problem where we would have absolutely done that.
Sure.
But also I think people were just getting like shot less back when we were kids. in terms of like just like random like stand your ground castle law shootings. I feel like that was happening less when we were younger. So like, I don't know. I feel like maybe we probably would get away with it differently.
That would have been a much more on brand for 2020 type of thing.
Yeah.
Actually, no, a 2020 retrospective might be kind of a fun discussion. The year from hell.
The year the world went inside.
Yeah. Yeah. That was because I remember that was like murder hornets and
yes,
protests, and there's all kinds of stuff happening that year.
Yeah, North Korea was testing nuclear weapons or something. Like so many crazy, like so many things. It was a real bad time.
Fire tornadoes. There were fire tornadoes on the West Coast. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, what a bad time.
Yeah. We should a retrospective of the horror that was 2020. Got so bad that at some point it was almost funny, but like sad.
Yeah. It was like what next? I can't even it was like everything from Cabin in the Woods got out.
Right? Yeah. There you go. That scene when the like elevator dings and like all of the horrors just explode, out of the elevators.
That's what it was. January 1st, ding, and then fire tornadoes show up.
16th or whatever.
Yeah, it's so bad. What a bad time. Yeah. I don't like that.
Yeah. Well, we got way off track, so we should probably let the ads take over for a second so we can get back on track. Now, we've been talking about these dancing plagues and some examples of sort of mass hysteria, if you will, or mass psychogenic illness is the more appropriate term to classify these, I guess. Let's talk about sort of from a behavioral science more perspective. Let's dig in the science of psychology here and what that might have to say about this.
Yeah, so when I was trying to do some research on this, there wasn't a lot of new research on it, but there were several studies focused on MPIs and vaccines. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Not surprised. Not surprised at all.
They're going to try and find a link.
Yeah. I mean, everybody's got their thing. So the first article I want to talk about is from Bartholomew and Perez. It came from 2018. And they basically reported that in Cuba, there were at least 24 people reporting to hear a loud, high-pitched sound, which resulted in other symptoms like headaches, memory loss, fatigue, difficulty concentrating, hearing loss, and nosebleeds.
Wow.
They were able to go in and they were able to rule out weapons due to the nature of like acoustical equipment that would be able to do that. Like they were basically saying like where these people were, they couldn't just do like a sound-based or like acoustic-based weapon.
Yeah.
To like, like disorienting thing. Like it wouldn't have worked the way that they were saying. Especially because like people were so targeted. And it was believed this event might have been an MPI, but they needed more information. They were saying basically they could not find any sort of like environmental source for why this was happening, but they were able to document that this thing did happen, and there was a consistent kind of report around the symptoms in this like kind of like this triggering event.
Right. A study from Trube and colleagues in 2019. This was related to hair loss. Post-finasteride syndrome, or PFS, is a lot easier to say, but is discussed as a potential delusional disorder. Basically, once treatment related to hair loss is discontinued, a series of symptoms that have no related medical origin begin to emerge. And so that's sort of another thing that was observed here.
Yeah, basically they were saying that like for like men who experience like genetic male pattern baldness and all stuff, they would go get treatment for hair loss. But then what would happen is once those treatments stopped, all of a sudden they started expressing these symptoms that had nothing to do with their treatment and had been ruled out in clinical trials. So basically they were saying like what these guys were experiencing after they ceased treatment was just a very unique kind of experience. They basically were saying like this PFS, the syndrome might not even be a real thing.
Do you think that they were microdosing them with like mushrooms, and then when they took them off, they had withdrawals?
Yeah, it's very possible. I think that'd be a fun trip, like where you just think that your hair is growing.
Yeah. Now, I think that there's one in here. I really like this. This seems to me to be one of the most parsimonious explanations that we can give in sort of thinking of Occam's razor here and what's going on with these dancing plagues or these mass psychogenic illnesses. And a lot of what is definitely happening is there's some amount of modeled behavior, meaning someone is doing something that is sort of seen as a demonstration that could be followed.
Sure.
And then observational learning, which is people seeing like, other people joining, they join in and they practice what they sort of mirror what they see in a way. So an argument could be made that a feature of these plagues could involve these components that we see people definitely use in other things. We see people use observational learning. They see something and then they sort of replicate it themselves. And this is actually something that other animals do, but not to the extent that humans do. Like we do it a lot. There's actually, we kind of lean on the fact that humans do this well as a part of our training. When a lot of times people are training new people for a job, they'll just show them how to do it and then expect them to be able to replicate it.
Right.
And that's not completely unique to humans, but it is something that humans do a lot and very well relative to other non-human animals. And then the other thing I mentioned is this observing model of behavior among other members of the community. And so a sequence would be something simple, like I see someone dancing and they get there's something going on here. They seem to be having fun. They might be getting attention. It feels good. There's cheering and laughter. And then the person's sort of like, I feel compelled to move, and they join in. They engage in similar behaviors. They get similar rewards. They feel like they're a part of something. Maybe there's some sense of unity, community. Sure. They sort of get into a cycle of like the exercise maybe even feels kind of good, but it's not super impact and it's low stakes. And so you get like endorphins happening, and it's sort of, there's this cycle of like stuff feels good until it doesn't.
Right. So it makes sense because if I join in, I get those similar rewards. But I think there's another part of this too, where, I can watch this, but then also accounting for the 15, 18 plagues where like, it's very possible that everybody was tripping on acid, like on LSD. And you think about that, then it makes sense that like, not only am I seeing this happen, but I am also seeing this under the influence. So I'm inebriated, so I have less inhibitions. So I'm more likely to engage in behavior that I normally wouldn't. That doesn't explain the length of period for like why people have engaged for so long, or like why people would go weeks and weeks while of doing this. But it does explain at least how easy it would be for somebody to join in and participate in an event like this.
I've heard people talk about like when they've played Tetris for hours and hours and they just like are constantly then imagining blocks falling, and they like are how they would twist and have them fit into a thing. And I've had that experience, when you've played video games a lot, or you've done anything where you've been super focused on one activity for a really long time. And then even when you move away from that, your mind is still kind of like in that mode, if you will.
Right.
And I imagine that there's some of that going on here. And I think if you really just think about this as the more you do something, the more you are doing that thing that sort of carries metaphorically momentum.
Right.
And you can sort of, you have this mass behind it of like, the more you've done it, the more established it becomes in your behavior and your muscles and your repertoire and the environment around you that has all of the stimuli that had no effect whatsoever that are now a cue that is associated with that behavior. And so now you're in this environment that's sort of constantly signaling do this, and there's really no cue that says don't do this at any point.
Right.
And I think that doesn't necessarily explain it completely, but I think it can account for a lot of it getting started and at least maintaining it to some degree.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I think another thing too is this idea of pro-social behavior or social norms. For example, this topic, as we're kind of diving into it, it made me think about kind of what pro-social behavior is. And for anybody who doesn't know what pro-social behavior is, it's any sort of response or behavior that is designed to benefit others or the community as a whole, right? So like I engage in behavior because it will serve the tribe, essentially. So here, we could ask the question, is it possible that the behavior of dancing wildly with a group of people could have been a benefit? If you're talking about mass stress, you're talking about, hey, like I get a little bit of like a release, a little bit of an outlet, some kind of fun.
Right.
So like it makes it like it provides like use stress for people in this space that are experiencing all of this distress kind of on an ongoing basis. I don't know. It's possible that that's probably a little bit of a stretch, but if the behavior persists over time, and it becomes kind of a fairly like normal behavior in a repertoire or a consistent repertoire in the community, then what's the difference between this and I guess other communities where dance is a central practice, right? It's like really kind of like a regular ongoing thing. And this is maybe like a one-off thing that's kind of abnormal, but maybe they're dancing in different places or different contexts. Maybe because it was out of context, people were really worried about it. There's a lot to kind of unpack within it, especially because we just don't know enough about these events.
Maybe people just need to dance.
That's it. Let's dance, right? According to David Bowie.
That's right.
See, it all comes back. It's full circle.
We did it. All right. A few more interesting tidbits here. These outbreaks are often referred to as the quote-unquote forgotten plagues. because they were so low impact compared to other major events. There was no known cause. They were kind of a fleeting, weird flash in the pan that usually didn't include a ton of people, although they did get, some of them got fairly large. And so these were kind of written off as psychological reactions to stress more than anything. But yeah, just a thing to consider there.
Yeah, another thing I thought was really interesting is many times what would happen is like when somebody would get involved in a dancing plague, what people would do, what authorities would do is they would quarantine those folks that were suffering, or they would be like, they would get isolated. But in some other places, what they would do is they would just play music to match the rhythm of the dancers and then just try to slow the tempo down so they would start dancing more slowly. And what ended up happening was, one, people just kept dancing regardless of how slow the music was. And two, playing the music actually brought more people into the dancing. So it ended up backfiring and causing a lot more problems.
That's kind of funny.
I think that's pretty great.
Yeah.
Where it's like, you know what we're going to do? You know how we're going to treat this? We're going to get a band together. And they do that, and they're like, and they slow it down, like, nope, everybody wants to dance until midnight or 2 a.m. It's like, I guess it's like kind of like being on a cruise ship.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the logic wasn't terrible on it, but it's funny that how poorly it ended up working out, I guess.
Arguably, at that time, that was probably the smartest thing that anybody ever did.
Actually, yeah, you make a really good point. Absolutely.
That's the most logical thing, as opposed to them go, you know why they're dancing? It's the frogs! And you're like, what? Like, how do we get here?
All right. I think that's what we have to say on dancing plagues. Do you have anything before we move on to our recommendations?
No, I mean, it's a really bizarre thing that has happened in human history, and like this like mass psychogenic illness thing is pretty unique and interesting, and there's still really no answers for it. So I think that's kind of the thing that we landed on. It was like, how could this have happened? We don't really know because nobody knows anything about this particular phenomenon.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think if I had any major take-home point is that, as you said, we're not clear on exactly what happened here. I think there's some things that we can turn to that are at least relatively low-hanging epistemological fruit, if you will.
Yeah.
Some ontological explanations that make more, I think, parsimonious sense than those that were offered up, definitely at the time, and even possibly since then. Although I like ergotism as a possible contributing variable to that. But yeah, we'll get to some recommendations, but we'll do the credits first to make sure that you stick around, because the recommendations are kind of the fun part, and then I don't want people to just skip this, but it's important to acknowledge that we could not do this without the support of the people who have joined us on Patreon. They joined us because they like us, and they're sweet, amazing, generous humans, and you can be one of those people too. And when you do that, you get access to bonus stuff in the back end, such as early access to episodes, ad-free episodes, behind-the-scenes content, and that sort of thing. If you don't want to do that, you can support us one time by making a purchase of something at our web store, which includes things like t-shirts and mugs and hats and beanies and water bottles and all kinds of stuff that just looks cool, you know?
Yeah.
And maybe for like one of the holidays that we've mentioned, you could get that as a celebration. There will be more holidays, I promise you.
Several at least.
I've yet to see a day that does not have any holidays listed, so I think we're full up on holidays, and gifts are just from our web store specifically are a great way to do that. As I said, leave us a rating or review. You can reach out to us if you'd like to tell us about Dancing Plague, some dancing plague that you've been a part of or would like to be a part of, or correct us on anything that we've said. You should definitely reach out to us. You can email us directly, info@wwdpodcast.com. You may have noticed that we've been getting more active on social media, so definitely reach out to us there.
Yes.
I wanted to mention at the top of this discussion and forgot that we have registered for the Podcast Awards. So I think it starts in July. You can go to podcastawards.com. You should be able to find us there and vote on us. Once I have more information, I'll communicate that in one of our episodes. For nominating us, that does not open until July 1st of 2023. So you can go in and nominate us for an award. And if you do that, we'll super appreciate it. So consider maybe those people who already joined us on Patreon. I forgot to mention, I need to tell you who they are because they're so wonderful. We have Mike M, Megan, Layla, Mike T, Justin, Kim, Joshua, the Daily BA, Brad, Stephanie, Olivia, and Brian. Thank you all so much for your continued support. As always, writing and fact-checking are done by me, Shane, and Jess. Special thanks to Shane for putting together today's discussion. And of course, thank you to Justin for music and production and all the editing that he does.
So great.
And I think that's everything before we get to some recommendations.
Yeah, I think that covers it.
Perfect.
Recommendations.
So I went and saw a movie that is just incredible, and that is Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse.
Looks good.
Did you see Into the Spider-Verse?
I did. I loved it. I was very impressed. I've been very excited to see this new one, so I'm looking forward to it.
It's incredible. I mean, like when you pay attention to the little details in it, it is so amazing what they were able to accomplish. They were able to bring in like over 1,000 artists to do different art styles throughout the entire movie.
Wow.
There's some really cool Easter eggs. There's some really fun things.
Sure.
The voice cast is great, and it just makes you want to be Miles Morales. And he's such a great Spider-Man. Like, he is so different than Peter Parker, but he's so endearing, and you just can't help but love him as a character. So
sure.
Anyway, it's really, really good, and I definitely recommend everybody going to see it in the theater. It's long, so make sure you use the bathroom before you watch it.
Fair enough. That's awesome. Love that.
Yeah.
I thought the first one was fantastic. This one looked really good. I'm really excited to see it. So
it's so fun.
In a similar vein, kind of in terms of media that we're pushing, I'm going to recommend Ted Lasso season 3. Have you watched any of the Ted Lasso show?
I've never watched it, but I've heard it's really great.
Oh my God. I love it so much. And I think it's really the fact that it's about soccer or football for the rest of the world is kind of incidental to the story. I mean, it is like the setting of a lot of the story, and there are some really like fun scenes of like games taking place when they're choreographed. They're fun to watch.
Yeah.
But it's really, in my mind, when I see this, it's really about human beings, opportunities for human beings at their best to like sort of be the best of humanity.
Yeah.
Just showing really wonderful arcs, showing each other kindness and compassion and redemption and forgiveness, and just such a well-written show, and it's funny and it's engaging. And season 3 in particular was definitely my favorite season. I think sadly it's going to be the last season. I think they're finishing it after this.
Yeah.
The stream's on Apple TV Plus, so however you get access to that, that's the only way I think that it's viewable. But I just really, really love the show and could not recommend it highly enough. And particularly season 3 was just phenomenal. Just so well done.
Yeah, I heard it was really good. I heard a lot of people crying about it.
Yeah, I can imagine. There's a lot of sort of teary-eyed moments in there. And they ended it really, really well. I mean, just so many kudos and hats off to the writers and the directors of that show. They did an incredible job.
I love that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for listening about Dancing Plagues. As I said, reach out to us. But I think for now, that is all we have. Anything that I'm forgetting or anything you'd like to add before we say goodbye?
Go listen to David Bowie.
Fair enough. On that, this is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to www.wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.